Well, good morning, everybody. It's a great privilege to be here against such august company as well. So I'm delighted, particularly on Budget Day. I guess my brief really is to explain the national security and defence demand signal that is emerging and indeed already exists. And to do that, I've got 4 slides and about 10 minutes. So you'll forgive me, I'm going to go at a little bit of pace. But hopefully I'll bring it to life for you and give you my perspective on why space is now so important for national security and defence. Let me start with this slide. And I think it's really important that you recognise that we now see space not just as a tech sector, but as a domain of strategic importance for our economy, for our prosperity, and for our military capability. I always quite like to indulge an audience with a little bit of a history lesson. So the UK deleted its space programme in 1971 under the Heath government. The only thing we didn't do was get rid of our satellite communications. And that was a good bet until 9/11 happened. When 9/11 happened, the hegemony that was the US that we'd relied upon for so many years turned its eye towards counterterrorism, and they took their eye off the ball in space. And so they deleted their space command. And so that assumption that we'd worked on for decades, that we'd get all of our space capability for the US, became unsafe. And that endured for about 15 years until we got through that global war on terror, came back to global power competition, and of course in that intervening period, particularly the Chinese, but also the Russians had developed their space portfolio and their capabilities at a rate that was absolutely phenomenal and caught us all out, to the point that space then became what we now call a contested domain, i.e. there is no hegemony anymore, it's completely contested. So I think that context is really important. And ever since then, we've been fighting to compete in space, and hence you can see all the investment that Mark's talked about earlier. The second thing that I think that's important about that history lesson is the tech's also increased throughout the years. Mark's touched on that really, really well, not least the reduction in launch costs by about 100x over the years, which means that all the flags that are represented here, where space was a domain of really about 5 players internationally, it's now about a domain of about 80 players internationally. So there's more congestion in space. So it's competed and it's also congested. And of course, it's inherently dual use. So I'll tell you that about 80% of the capabilities that I use come from the commercial sector. There's very little that defence uses that can't also translate into commercial opportunities. So we like to now describe this as an era, not just a new space age, but a new era of astropolitics. Obviously, there's geopolitics, but I think astropolitics is a word that I've kind of anchored to. Some don't like it. I like to use it because people always remember it. And so I think we're in an era of astropolitics. So that's kind of the macro point. Some statistics around that, and this isn't my slide, this is a UK Space Agency slide. So defence expenditure last year, given all the geopolitics that we're facing at the moment, was up about 10%. It's hit about $2.7 trillion over the last year. The global space economy, as of today, is about 600 billion, with a forecast to rise to about 1.8 trillion by 2035. VC investment in European defence sector is also up and is about 50% increase from 2024, and is due to increase that growth, projected growth annually of about 10% over the next few years through to 2035. Importantly, though, this is the UK numbers. This is what I get paid to do. So I do 2 things. I protect and defend our national interests in space, and I deliver space capabilities to our armed forces. Why is that important? Well, protecting and defend our national capability is important because you can see the numbers there, particularly on a budget day today. It's actually about 20% of UK GDP is underpinned by space-based services, about £450 billion every year. So, of course, it's my job to ensure that that is assured. Really important that we put our arms around that and can assure that to the government. There's also revenue. So the UK space sector increases its revenue by about 19 billion a year. And you can see some of the numbers in terms of the actual sector. About 2,000 organisations employ about 55,000 people. And of course, you can scale this globally, but this is broadly the sector. And this has played through in all the government documents that you've seen recently in terms of the industrial strategy, the defence industrial strategy, and the strategic defence review. So I guess the message to take away is this is fundamentally important to our economy, our military capability, and our prosperity going forward. So what for defence? A bit closer to home for me than the numbers. That's all your area, not mine. I like to use this slide to sort of talk about the importance of space to the military. You know, most of you know, or some of you may know, that I was in the US before I took over this job. And I think the UK traditionally is focused on the right-hand side of the slide, what we call space support to operations. So that's where we can sense globally through ISR, where we can communicate globally using things like SATCOM and data relays, and where we can have precision effect with things like GPS, delivered guided munitions. That space support to operations is traditionally what we've focused on. But I think, given what I've said about that competed domain, the focus is rapidly shifting to the left-hand side of the slide here. And what I'd like to highlight here is that I talked about astrographic region. Well, that starts about 60 miles above us, 100 kilometres. So that's my domain. So on behalf of the Chief of Defence and the Prime Minister, I own that domain on your behalf, and I need to protect and defend it. So I always joke that I have the largest domain of any commander in the defence with the smallest amount of people in it. I think about 7 at the moment. The point to take away here is that traditionally we've focused on air supremacy to deliver freedom of manoeuvre in the land and the maritime environments. And indeed that was a bit of a fight back in 1915, but of course the argument was won to the point that in 1945 Montgomery, one of our finest soldiers, said, if we lose the war in the air, we'll lose the war and we'll lose it quickly. I think that now transcends up into space. And if we can't control the space domain, we'll really struggle to get control of the air domain, and we'll lose our freedom of manoeuvre in the land and maritime environment. If you want a really good example of that, it's Ukraine, where we don't have control of space in Ukraine, we don't have control of the air, and therefore it's a really bloody mess on the land and the maritime environment. So really important, I think, that you understand that there's 2 aspects to space that the military views its capabilities through. Space support to operations, really important, but also control of the domain, the triangle on the left. And accordingly, my job is to protect and defend our national interests, the triangle on the left, but also deliver space support to operations, the honeycomb on the right. And I think the important bit, and you'll note it goes all the way back to 2023 with a quote at the top, I think we're just getting there in the UK now, that when you get a naval officer who's the Vice Chief of Defence in the US saying that space has emerged as their most essential warfighting domain, you know it's important. And I think we're very close to that now in the UK. For those that read it, the Strategic Defence Review is published in April. We're hoping to get to the Defence Investment Plan this side of Christmas. You heard it here first. But that SDR has an independent chapter on space, chapter 7.5, which is the first time we've seen that, shows that we're bringing space to parity with the more traditional investment areas across defence and its importance to the government and the nation. My final slide, wrong one, sorry. So what for the capability thesis? What are we trying to do to bring that challenge to life through capability investment? So I talk about 3 vertically aligned stacks and outcomes that we're trying to achieve, which is on the right-hand side of the slide there. I don't like to talk requirements, I like problems-based acquisition. We give tech problems to commercial industry for investors then to invest in those technical solutions and come to us and say, here's the best way to do it. Rather than say, here's 1,000 requirements, can you come back and give me the answer to that? That would be a poor way of doing business, what we've always done over the years. So those vertically aligned stacks, which you can see in the Defence Review and what we're working on now, are threefold. Control of the domain, my triangle on the left-hand side of the slide, and then on the honeycomb, decision advantage. We need to be able to talk and make decisions globally, and then sense to understand and to strike. Military language, but that's to find things and then do something about them. And you can relate those, of course, to space capabilities. So space control, you need command and control nodes on the ground with software-defined decision solutions. You need data links and you need spacecraft that can deliver ISR, so find things in space, but also affect them. So that's a system of systems in our space control vertically aligned stack. You then have decision advantage. That's largely satellite communication. I think given the threat, we're rapidly moving off geostationary, big satellites, and we're looking at hybrid solutions now over multiple orbits as we go forward to give us that resilience that we need against the threat. And then finally, Sense is a program we call ISTARI, which is our national ISR constellation that allows us to target globally. Really important. I'll come to that. Overlaid on top of that is how we then procure capability, which you'll be interested in. We use this own, access, collaborate, then. Own I don't like. I think it's too binary, so I prefer nationally separable. And what I mean by that is we'll always contribute. When policy doesn't align, we'll pull it back so that we can have a sovereign capability. And so the defence review for us and our investment, government and defence investment, is all about what we need to own. What must I assure to the nation, aligned against those three vertical stacks? The other two might be of more interest to you. There's a whole ton, though, 80% of the capabilities, I've said earlier, that we will access through commercial or collaborate with our allies to deliver. And I think that's really important to understand. So we'll own and buy the things that we must assure. Everything else we'll do through accessing through commercial or collaboration with our allies and partners. Let me just overlay ISR, so intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, so Earth observation in tech language for space. So nationally separable. Right now, I own one ISR satellite, woefully inadequate. We've got a program of record to build that out. Access, we spend about £50 million a year on commercial imagery. And collaboration, we get about £5 billion of commercial imagery from our American colleagues and friends. So you can see that's woefully out of kilter. And so we need to invest now in things that we are nationally separable in terms of our own capability to target, and do more in terms of accessing through commercial. So hopefully that gives you a sense of where defence is going. Didn't have long. There's a sort of a macro, it's now a domain of strategic competition, well recognised across government. Defence realises it's got some gaps in its capability. It's been well recognised through the Defence Review. We've got a capability thesis that looks at 3 outcomes that we seek to achieve in defence, and there's a thesis in terms of where we need to invest and why we need to invest in it. So I'll just conclude, I think we're taking questions, by saying that I think space is now one of the most important defence interest areas, and we recognise that we need to do more to come to parity with the other domains and ensure we can protect and defend our national interests and deliver the services that the joint force is going to really need and rely on if it's going to compete globally into the future. Thanks very much for your time.
I thought we might just take a couple of questions if there is
cool.
any interest in the audience. Let's go with the first hand up over here.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much. It was really interesting. If I could just ask, what exactly does it mean sort of to control space? As in, are you able to deny access to a particular area of sort of vehicles you don't want to be there? Or is that important to do so?
Great question. So it's about us being able to have freedom of manoeuvre at a time and place of our choosing, both so that we can operate with impunity with our own spacecraft and we can stop an adversary from doing the same.
One more question. Who's next? There we go.
Hi, Carl Christian Reiner, private investor. To own your own capabilities, obviously understand the satellite question, but launch capacity, I mean, that must also surely be of national interest.
Yeah, it's a great question. So what I didn't say just through time is that they're the outcomes that we seek. Thank you for the question. There's a whole lot of horizontals that feed those, whether it be AI, quantum. I think launch is in there for us. I think my view into the Defence Review was that we have so little in terms of space architecture that we own at the moment. To invest in launch as a national capability would be slightly perverse at the moment. It's an absolute requirement for us, assured launch. But given where we are in terms of gaps in space control, gaps in ISR, gaps in SATCOM, we need to get the basic architectures right, and then we can look at the next generation of launch capabilities. And I think as we understand better in-service manufacturing, as Mark mentioned earlier, there is a view that you can sustain spacecraft for much longer. And as we go forward and the tech matures, 5 to 7 year lives where you need life cycle, where you need more launch, that again might evolve as we can sustain spacecraft for longer in orbit.
Thank you very much.
So I've just got 2 points before we finish. First of all, you've talked about the UK there. Is it safe to say that the gaps that and the deficits of capability that we have in the UK, is that played out across Europe? Is that safe to say?
Yeah, I think it is. And if you haven't been watching the news, so the Germans, I think 2 months ago, announced 40 billion investment in military space capability between now and 2030. So they clearly recognise it and are investing in it. And 2 weeks ago, I was very privileged to be at the opening of the new French Space Command with President Macron. So the president was there. It gives you a sense of how important they think it is. And they announced £4.2 billion of investment in military space capability between now and 2030. So I think you can see a real vector now into trying to shore up some of these gaps, because the history lesson I outlined, where for all good reasons we have relied on our great friends in the US to deliver the domain for us, that's now not credible anymore. We need to do something about it.
Yeah. We opened an office in Berlin, sponsored the conference where the German defense minister made that announcement. We were the keynote that morning of that conference. Final point from me is that here in the UK, we've just appointed the armaments director, who is in charge of procurement for defence. And the person that they've chosen to do that is our friend Rupert Pearce, who's the ex-CEO of Inmarsat.
Yeah.
So what do we read into the fact that the most important procurement change in the history of procurement for defence, they've chosen a space guy to do that? Is there anything we should be reading into that?
Ooh, I'm not sure. What I would say, though, is that the NAD is trying to change the dynamics of the sector and make us a much better exploiter of technology, a better customer. We all recognise that the procurement model is silted up. It's not particularly agile, and we're not exploiting the technology to keep pace with the threat. And so we need to do something about that. I think having a space NAD is really helpful because he will intuitively understand that. And the second thing I'd say is that I also, under that new NAD, have volunteered to be the first portfolio we stand up. So the Space Systems portfolio